Well, greetings and salutations, test takers. This is the Series 7 Guru coming to you from my studio in fabulous Las Vegas. We do an office hour for people who've spent money. What I mean by that is if you've spent money tutoring or one of my evening classes, we offer evening classes that vary in investment from $30 to $60. You can check those out as a replay, but that would be a way to access the office hour. You can get the office hour for free. It's a $225 value because that's what I charge for an hour tutoring. The other way you can get access to the free tutoring hour is by winning our drawing that we do on our Tuesday live streams. Everything on my channel, the YouTube channel, is free. I don't sell channel memberships. I don't sell coffee cups and t-shirts and mugs. But on my booking page, and I'll put a link to the booking page, there are only two things that are free, and that is the live stream overtime session. We have one coming up Tuesday. You're welcome to join us. That's where we get a whiteboard. For example, Zach wants to go over the underwriting spread and participants. That doesn't lend itself well to the normal live stream we do on Tuesday night. So on the overtime session, I have a whiteboard and we can do questions like that. I'm going to do that right now in this session for Zach, but that's the kind of thing. That's free. And then that office hour is free again if you have won the drawing. And I think in Ethan's case, he's been using the channel. I see him a lot. Sometimes I'll offer the office hour as a scholarship. I'll say that doesn't lend itself well to me trying to answer in a post on one of our Reddit communities or our Facebook community. I'll say, why don't you join us for the office hour and I'll take care of it there. So anyways, I'll link to those for you and we'll get underway with what we want to talk about in this office hour. First up is the underwriting spread. So let me grab a whiteboard. Yeah, well, that's awful. So Ethan, it's an office hour. It is not office hours, but we'll get as much done as we can. I'm teasing. All right. My friends tell me I should tell people when I'm teasing because some people think I'm serious sometimes. They, what an asshole. All right. So here we go. We're going to knock out the spread first. The way it works in our office hours, first come, first serve, first into the chat is what we answer first. I also reference, and I'll reference now, videos that I'll put in the video description. I have a whole video and tutoring replays on spreads, and I have a whole video on underwriting municipal bonds, and I'll put that in there as well. But Zach, here's an example, very much as something you could see on your exam. And the first question right out of the gate is, what do we call the difference between what the issuer receives and the investor pays? You know the answer to that?
Yeah, Dean, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
That'd be the spread.
Right on. So warning that sometimes Dean is being a jerk and Tess isn't going to warn you. So what is the spread here that we're looking at? What is the spread?
E10.
Yeah, but again, Zach, you don't sound like a player. No bond guy is ever going to say $10.
That's right.
A bond guy is going to say a point, which indeed is $10. But, bond guys don't talk like that. They don't say $10. They don't say $5. They don't say $2.50. Bond guys say there's a point. Now, there are components of the spread you get tested for. There's three components we're going to be discussing here presently. But the only person who can collect every component of the spread, make the entire $10 per bond, is the manager. The one I use, Zach, is the Soprano Syndicate, right? I may be dating myself, assuming you ever watched the episodes of Soprano. Tony is the boss, and Tony calls it his taste. We call it the management fee. Tony says, I don't care who does what in my syndicate. I expect my taste on everything. That's called the management fee in our business. I saw an episode once where Tony did his own deal with his nephew, Chris, and he captured the entire spread. And his nephew, Chris, said, well, are we going to split this up? Are we going to, kick some of this to our other syndicate members? And he said, boy, Chris, you're kind of new. I don't kick down, people kick up. If I do the deal myself, I'm making the entire spread. Well, let's say that my firm, Gamma Global, is the managing underwriter. And so that means no matter who sells the bonds, I'm going to get my management fee. And let's say that the management fee and the deal we're working on is 1/8. Now, again, we would never say $1.25, but that's what 1/8 is, right? 1/8 is, $1.25. Very testable to know that corporates and munis, whether we're issuing them in the primary market or we're trading them in the secondary market, the minimum spread is going to be 1/8. And I get that on every bond sold. Test question. The management fee is typically the smallest individual component of the spread. So that is testable to know that that is the smallest individual component of the spread. I said all the components of the spread are testable as well as the participants in the underwriting. And so let's put that there. Boom. And let's make up an answer set. All about the answer set. Someday I always threaten I'm going to write an entire practice exam that just has answer sets. And so here, let's put management fee. Boom, we'll put that there. Let's make another answer set. And let's put managing underwriter. Boom. I think of the managing underwriter is first among equals. First among equals. Right? All right, so that's our first component of the spread. So if you are a member of my syndicate, so let's say Zach works at Goldman Sachs, and I say, hey, Goldman Sachs, as a member of my syndicate, I'll let you take down bonds for $991.25. Now, I'm joking, Zach, because, Goldman has kind of an ego, and Goldman would say, Dean, we don't, we can't lead. We're not doing it. I'm joking, but there's a pretty ego on the tombstones and things like that. I mean, I've seen bankers give up millions of dollars just because they don't want to be on the tombstone below some other firm, right? So I'm teasing, but in my example, Goldman would probably be manager or co-manager. But anyways, let's say Zach works at Goldman, and Goldman says, we want to take down some bonds. Let's say we're doing $100 million worth of bonds. And I say to Goldman, how many bonds do you want to take down? How many bonds do you want to take down? Now, Zach should probably ask me before he commits Goldman Capital. What kind of syndicate is it? Right? Because that would kind of have something to do with how many bonds he wants to take down. What are the two types of syndicates? What are the two types of syndicates?
Eastern and Western.
Right on. So if this is a Western divided syndicate and Goldman takes down 10 million, the way I think of it, Zach, in a Western divided syndicate, what goes down stays down. And that's very testable too. If you put into channel search bar syndicates, you can watch a couple examples where I go through various liabilities involved in syndicate. Now, if it's an undivided Eastern syndicate, it's important that Goldman told me 10 million. What's important is that that's 10% of the deal. And so if this thing blows up, you're on the hook for 10%. I think of Western, I think of, Clint Eastwood, John Wayne, mano a mano, this side of the Rockies. You tell me you're going to do something, you're going to do it. Eastern, I think of Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Mafia. They're always in it together. I had some investment bankers later, Crystal, such classy ladies, but they do investment banking, corporate, municipal finance. And she told me the way she thinks of the syndicate, Zach, is as a family dinner. In a Western family dinner, you just got to eat your own meal and then you get to leave the table. But in an Eastern family dinner, we keep passing it around and nobody leaves until, we get it all ate, right? So now Goldman has to make a decision here. Goldman probably is going to sell some of the bonds themselves and maybe get some help selling bonds. And so if Goldman wants to sell the bonds through their own distribution network, they could make the total takedown. The total takedown is not an individual component of the spread. the total takedown is 2 components of the spread. I'm going to show that too. And I always like it, Zach, when somebody in our office hour wants to talk about something that's testable rather than things that aren't testable. I mean, I'll still talk about them, but my friend Brian doesn't talk, he won't even talk about it. He'll say, it's not on the test, I'm not going to talk about it. But all right. So we're again, the 2 main things here are to know these components of the syndicate and to know, the participants. And, maybe, Zach, you say, hey, Dean, do you know anybody who might be interested in help us sell some bonds? Goldman Sachs doesn't have much of a retail distribution network, but Fidelity certainly does. And I'm never surprised to see Fidelity as a selling group member in a Goldman deal, right? Because what Fidelity brings to the table is tons of retail customers, particularly as it relates to muni bonds, right? So, here we have to decide where we want to sell ourselves. So let's say Goldman calls up Fidelity and says, would you like to join my bracket? What Goldman is doing here is building their bracket. It's called, not testable. I'll tell you it's testable. And Fidelity says, sure, we'll help sell bonds. And Goldman says, we'll let you have bonds for $9.95. So even on the bonds that Fidelity is selling, Goldman is going to make $3.75. And remember, Fidelity as a selling group member is not at risk for unsold securities. And so what they're going to make is what we call very testable, the selling concession. The selling concession, which in this case is $5. They do ask you on the test about compensation. And what I mean by that is they'll say on the test that your firm is a member of the selling group. The selling concession is 0.5 point. Your firm sells X number of bonds. What is their compensation? And it'd be 50,000 bonds, let's say, times 5. And that would be the answer to that compensation question. We also do ask you about the distinction between selling group members or members of a selling group and the distinction between syndicates. Selling group members are not members of the syndicate. They are not members of the syndicate. And the reason that's important is because test question, they have no liability for unsold securities. They have no liability for unsold securities. And here, I'll just make up a throwaway answer here, which is typical of the test. We'll put here the issuer. That's not the right answer in any example that we're working on. And let's put it here. These are important answer sets. Oh, okay. Be careful what you're being asked. Be careful what you're being asked. RTFQ. If I ask you the largest individual component of the spread, that answer is the selling concession. But if I ask you the largest component, that's the total takedown. Are we clear? That's not the right answer if I ask individual component, because the total takedown is not a what? Individual component of the spread. Right? So you got to be real careful about what you're being asked. Right? Okay, so let's go through this now based on what we call the exhibit. We love exhibit questions because we know the answer is there. We just got to find it, right? So here we go. Your firm made 0.5 point selling a bond to a customer and was not at risk for unsold securities. I told you this answer set is very testable. Your firm made 0.5 point selling a bond and was not at risk for unsold securities. Are you A, the managing underwriter of your firm? The underwriter, member of the syndicate? By the way, member of the syndicate underwriters are synonymous. That's the challenge on the 7-2. It's like learning a foreign language, right? So there's a lot of words that kind of mean the same thing based on context. Was your firm a selling group member, a member of the selling group, or was your firm the issuer? What say you? Your firm made a half a point selling a bond to a customer and was not at risk for unsold securities. A, B, C, or D?
C.
Right on. Very testable. Very testable. Right? Let's say, let's try another one. Your firm made an eighth selling on a bond that some other firm sold. Your firm made an eighth on a bond that some other firm sold and was at risk for unsold securities. Was your firm A, managing underwriter, B, underwriter, C, selling group, D, the issuer? What say you do that one? Your firm made an eighth on a bond that some other firm sold and was at risk.
You'd be the managing underwriter.
Right on, right on, right on. Your firm made 7/8. Your firm made 7/8 selling a bond to a customer and was at risk for unsold securities. Your firm made 7/8 total takedown and was at risk for unsold securities.
You'd be an underwriter.
Yeah, that's an underwriter who kept the bonds, right? That's Goldman. And when Goldman sells the bonds itself, it makes its 3/8 and it gets to keep the half as well, right? They get two components. All right, let's do a trickier one. Here's the trickiest one I think of so far, what I've asked. Your firm made a half a point. Your firm made a half a point on a bond that some other firm sold and was at risk for unsold securities. Your firm made a half a point on a bond that some other firm sold and was at risk for unsold securities. That's me giving up bonds to my selling group. If I'm the managing underwriter, right, I get an eighth and then I build my own selling group. I call Schwab and I say, hey, Schwab, I'll let you have some bonds for $9.95. Schwab says to Gamma Global, that's my firm. They say, Schwab says, hey, Dean, can we have bonds for less than $9.95? We know you're giving syndicate members bonds at $991.25. We go, absolutely not. If you're not a member of the syndicate, you can't get bonds for $991.25. Very important, very testable. We can't cut side deals with people. We got to stick to this spread until I, the manager, break syndicate. Then it's every man or woman for themselves. All right, let's try another tricky one. Another tricky one. Your firm made a point. Your firm made a point selling one of these bonds. Who's the only one that can capture every component of that spread?
The managing underwriter.
Yeah, that's the bonds I sell myself, right? You know, we no longer have a firm with us anymore called Drexel Burnham Lambert, but Drexel Burnham Lambert didn't make any friends because they would always do all the deals themselves. They'd create no syndicate. That means they're keeping all the money. You know, nothing wrong with that, except that when you have problems, you ask your friends to bail you out. What do they say? I joke, if in our business, to be honest with you, if you're, in good standing, we'll do something. Well, in Drexel's case, all the members said, we'll wait and get it out of bankruptcy from you, which is, in other words, I say, hey, listen, Ethan, I'm going to wait till they foreclose upon you before I actually help you go buy your house from you. I mean, that's not good. All right. Any questions on that, this section here? I think this was a pretty good overview of the test questions. I think the biggest takeaway are these two answer sets. And let me get my thing out here, right? You should be comfortable with these syndicates. And then just make sure you're careful, because every once in a while somebody will call me and say, oh, Dean, you said the largest individual component of the spread is the selling concession. And here's a practice question where it says it's the total takedown. I go, well, read the question again. If it says largest component of the spread, that's the total takedown, but that is not an individual component. Now, what I showed you here, Zach, is a muni bond, because that's what they show you on the test. And if this was a stock, we wouldn't be using the term takedown. That would be the underwriter's concession. But stocks are very similar in terms of this spread, right? Any question on that before we move on to option questions that Ethan wants to talk about?
Yeah, I've had a few questions where the syndicate members have invited selling group members.
Yeah.
And what the selling group members sell, the syndicate is entitled to the difference between the additional takedown and what the selling.
Yeah, if I build my own bracket, my own selling group, right? I get the 3/8, right? So if I'm building a selling group, my selling group says, what can I take down bonds for? This would be my Goldman Fidelity example, or myself, comma, Global Schwab. I say you can take down bonds for $9.95. So I'm going to make 3/8 on the bonds that my selling group sells. Does that, Zach, answer what you're asking or not?
Yes, so based on what the selling group would sell, you'd be entitled to that 125 here in this point.
I'm entitled to 3/8 here. On the bonds that my selling group sells, I still get my additional takedown,
Okay,
right? If this was a stock, that would be called the underwriting fee, and I would be, or the underwriter's concession, I would get those, same thing. I would get to keep that. So I'm keeping, in this case, the idea here is I can sell more if I have a selling group. Right? Because I have more distribution. So, here distribution wise, you told me, let's say you told me you're going to take down 10 million of these bonds, right? So you took down 10 million, maybe you give 5 million to your selling group and you keep 5 million of the bonds. In that example, you're making a 3/8 on 10 million bonds, 10 million of the bonds, because you get that on every bond. And then on 5 million, you get the other half, you get the total of 7/8. And the 500,000 you gave your selling group, you just get the 3/8 because you got to pay them, right? They get that half. I kind of think it resembles to me, I don't know if it's helpful. It resembles to me like network marketing, multi-level marketing, like a pyramid, right? It's kind of like Mary Kay Cosmetics, and I'm Mary Kay, right? It doesn't matter who sells Mary Kay Cosmetics, Mary Kay gets her piece, right? Or Amway, or pick your pyramid scheme of choice. I'm joking. Direct marketing. I think it used to be called multi-level marketing. Now I think they call it network marketing. Any other questions about this? Very testable. All this stuff is testable. So I'm assuming you're both taking Series 7. So if you're not taking Series 7, then, if you're watching this office hour replay, I wouldn't worry about any of this as it relates to, maybe on the SIE, knowing selling group members don't have any liability, but, this is mainly 7 stuff. And it's also, 10 stuff, 24 stuff, right? So any other questions on this before we move on?
I think that's all. Thank you.
Okay, you bet, Zach. Boom, boom, boom. Let me get rid of this. I forgot to tell you, you guys could record too, but it'll be on the channel here after we're done, so you can watch it then. Clear drawings, okay. So we're on to our friend Ethan. Ethan, that is just a lot of stuff. It's just a lot of stuff you have there. So I'm just going to ask you to kind of narrow that down a little bit. You got option taxation. Let me just real quickly, there are only 3 things that can happen to an option contract. I'm not asking you what can happen to you as a player. I'm asking what can happen to an option contract. I think an analogy would be if you say, hey, Dean, what can happen to the game of chess? I say, either in the game of chess, the 2 events are checkmate, stalemate. This game either ends with both kings alive or one of the kings dead. And you say, well, is that good news or bad news? I said, that depends on the king. So this is a memory aid device. And what this memory aid device is about is helping us to remember that every question is going to end with either the option contract got traded, the option contract got traded, the option contract expired, or the option contract got exercised. Right, so a good way to remember that is T. P.S. Ethan, I'm under no obligation on the test to tell you at the end of the question whether the contract expired or got exercised. And what I mean by that is, if you were a broker working for me, I'd make you write 1,000 times options are a wasting asset. Time value erodes. At expiration, an option contract is only worth its intrinsic value. If it has no intrinsic value, the contract will expire worthless. I shouldn't have to tell you that if it's a 220 Apple 220 call, and at expiration Apple is 218, that call expires worthless. I shouldn't have to tell you that if it's an Apple 220 call, and at expiration Apple's 228, it's going to get exercised. So if at expiration the contract has no intrinsic value, it will expire. Now, warning, I'm being a jerk. Is that good news or bad news if an option contract expires?
It depends who you are in the position.
Right on. I didn't catch you. You were right. You said, Dean, you got to tell me whether I was long or whether I was short. So I'm going to address, Ethan, your question about taxation present. In the circumstance in which an option contract gets traded, or in the circumstance in which an option contract expires, it's going to be taxed short term. All options trading and option expiration is short term. The only exception to that, because to qualify for long-term capital gain, Ethan, you have to be at risk for more than 12 months. You know, a lot of people say, oh, you got to own it for more than 12 months. Please note, I didn't say you got to own it for 12 months. I just said you have to be at risk for more than 12 months, right? And so the only exception to that would be a leap. Because a leap, you could actually own it for more, be at risk for more than 12 months. So the only option transaction where it's not a result of exercise that could possibly be long-term is a leap contract that you're long. It wouldn't matter if you were short more than a year, it'd still be short-term. So that's it, short-term. I'll bring up a screen here in just a moment and I'll go through this with you. Now, for the most part, if the option contract is exercised, the tax consequences follow break even. All right, so let me go grab a screen. Boom. Crystal, welcome back. Let me go.
Thank you. I had technical difficulties, but I'm tapped in now.
No worries, no worries. Let me go get, we're going over it just so you know, in the office hour, we're going over taxation on options. And I think Ethan, Ethan, have you ever spent any money with me? I think I invited you just to join us because you were working hard and you had some questions, I think. Did you ever give me any money?
Yeah, I've joined a few classes.
Okay, cool. Okay, good. I wasn't going to kick you out. I was just going to, remind people that sometimes I do let people access the office hour, even if they haven't paid, just depends. Okay, here we go. So boom, boom, boom. And if you join me in a Kaplan class, I make that same offer to you. Okay, let me find you guys. Where did you guys go? There you are. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is your discussion, Ethan. You wanted to know about taxation on options. So options taxation, we're going to be doing a closing sale to eliminate or reduce or offset a long position. So that's important, to know the transactions. Every time I get a chance to put up an answer set of this, I do so. If we do a closing purchase, that's what we're using to eliminate or reduce or offset. We said there's three things that can happen in the option contract. It can be traded, it can expire, it can be exercised, right? If the option contract expires, it has no intrinsic value. So here's a couple examples of test questions. Your client does an opening purchase of 1 May 30, call it 2. Now, there's lots of ways to do options. If you're with Dean, you know that what Dean practices is the T, and I believe in tracking monies in and out of the account. Lots of ways to do options, but this is how I like to do it. And I don't like to put $300 in there because, to be honest with you, I just think that's a mental mess. I like to do things on a per share basis. And then when I'm all done, I do have, and I will link to it for you, Ethan, an entire hour tutoring session where I went over taxation on options with somebody at Replay. We did like 20 questions. And more often than not, it's just the same as the break even. So they're just trying to trick you by doing it. So we bought this thing for 2. And then it says we do our closing sale for 3. So are we happy or are we sad?
We're happy.
Yeah, right. So we made a point on one contract, that's $100, and that's a short-term capital gain. Right. By the way, I think most of the time, Ethan, this is just a camouflage kind of profit question. Right. I mean, if you don't freak out, oh my God, taxation. You could say, okay, well, I got $100 gain, and then they'll offer you a couple $100 one. They'll say short-term, long-term. I told you all trading is short-term, right? Here it says we did an opening sale of one May 30, call it 6. And then we did a closing purchase at 8. So are we happy or sad?
Sad?
Yeah, we got a $200 loss, and all options trading is short-term. All short-term. So we're going to net our short-term loss with that short-term gain, right? And again, it wouldn't be any different if this was just a question about, break even. We said the option expires. That's either good news or bad news. I said for the most part, cost basis follows break even. So almost always, there's a couple exceptions, and I'll bring it up. But for the most part, cost basis follows break even. So if you exercise an Apple 220 call and you paid 4 for it, your break even is 224 and your cost basis in Apple is 224. Right? If you sell an Apple 220 put at 4, right? The break even is 216, right? So sales proceeds is after you do that. So here's an example of this as a test question. Your customer buys an ABC November 40 call at 3 and exercises. So his cost basis is 43 in the stock. And then it says he sells it for 45. He's got $200 gain. Now, I'm not so sure I should even tell you about exceptions because you don't want to go down any rabbit holes. But 2 things I would point out to you. The one time the cost basis doesn't follow break even is like a covered call. If I do a covered call, my cost basis is what I paid for the stock, and the sales proceeds is my premium I collected as well as what I sold the stock for. So that's the one time break even doesn't follow cost basis. One other point. We have to be at risk for more than 12 months. So if we buy the stock and 6 months later we buy a protected put, we're no longer at risk. Because we put in that floor, and so now we've interrupted our holding period. It resets from that. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. Can we go over the 75-5-10 rule? We certainly will. Okay, so we're working on Ethan's thing, option taxation. We did a little bit about that. Partial versus full hedge. I can certainly talk about that. Partial hedges kind of work, Ethan. Kind of work. They don't really work effectively. Right? What I mean by that is, why be silly? So, a partial hedge is mainly about income. It's not really about, can you see my screen? Yes, no, maybe. Can you guys see the screen?
Yes, we can.
You see me rolling through a bunch of slides?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, no?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. So here are some practice questions, right? Here's some practice questions. Most protection means we don't want a partial hedge. So we have a short stock position. What we'd be interested in is a long call. Protection means you're always buying the option. And so here's a nice little overview of full versus partial hedges. So if I'm long the stock, hedging isn't about what if I'm right. Hedging is about what if I'm wrong. Now, you should know that if I'm long the stock, I'm interested in being able to sell the stock. Either I'm going to have a choice to sell the stock, a full hedge, or an obligation to sell the stock, a partial hedge. Partial meaning I get some price decline protection, right? And so here we go. There's our full hedge, buying a put. There's our partial hedge, selling a call. If we go back here, here's a covered call. Here, Ethan, the hedge is the 7 points I'm bringing in. I'm lowering my out-of-pocket cost from 40 to 33. So I do get some price decline protection. That's a partial hedge. The floor is still 0. In other words, instead of falling down 40 flights of stairs, I'm going to fall down 33 flights of stairs. That's still painful. This is an effective hedge. That is an effective hedge because now the floor is 35. I'm out 43. I can sell the stock at 35. I don't fall down 30 flights plus of stairs. I only fall down 8. That's the full hedge. and this is the partial hedge. Right, and then let's, here's another question. Most protection long stock, we're going to say buy a put. If we say generate additional income, we're going to do a covered call, short call. Right, those are very much answer sets. It's all about the answer sets on the test. All right, so the other position we can have on the test is short stock. And as you've been with me any length of time, I say, don't be a dumb bear. Don't be a dumb bear. Because if all you do is sell stock you don't own, by the way, don't make fun of my bear. I know he looks like a teddy bear instead of a ferocious bear, but you know, I'm gonna have to find a new bear that looks a little crazy like my bull there, right? But anyways, if you don't hedge that short stock position, that'd just be stupid. That's the full hedge. This is really stupid because that kind of works, and in a short stock position kind of works, isn't going to do it. You're still exposed to unlimited risk. By the way, I would call this A, B, C, D. And then I might ask you which of these subjects an investor to unlimited risk. And it'd be the short stock position with the short put, because it doesn't work, right? It's a partial hedge. So that answers that question for you. Let's see what's next. Well, you nailed it. When you're selling options, it's income. When you buy options, it's protection. Ethan, that part you're spot on that. That's exactly right. Right? If you want income, you're going to sell the call. If you want protection, you're going to buy a put. Looks like Zach has a spread, and then we got a 75-5-10 rule, and then we'll call it a day. Zach, your choice. Do you want to do a whiteboard or you want to do a slide? What's your choice? What do you want to do?
Go with whiteboard.
Whiteboard, okay. And then remember, Ethan, too, I have a whole replay on option taxation, and I'll link that in the replay. I got two. I got a tutoring replay, and then I got another tutoring session where we did 20 taxation option questions. So you can watch both those as well. Okay, so I call it don't hate the 8. Don't hate the 8. And what I mean by that is there are 8 test questions about spreads. 8 test questions about spreads. And if you do all of my 8 things, whatever they want to know, you've got the answer. And the other reason I like my don't hate the 8 is because if you have a process, it's easier for you to catch yourself if you make a mistake. You know, I can't tell you how many times people will be watching one of my videos and they go, oh, how you messed up. And I said, well, geez, before you send me a nasty comment, why don't you give me about 10 seconds and you'll see that I caught myself. Right? I mean, you know, max gain, max loss, kind of a trick, but the gain and the loss always equals. The gain and the loss always equals the difference in the strikes, because that's the whole point of a spread. Is you want to play between the strikes. There's a floor and a ceiling, and then you don't want to play no more. And, you know, kind of another trick, you should know that if you buy an option, that's your loss. If you buy a call, buy a put, buy a straddle, buy a spread, that's your loss. And you should know that if you sell an option, sell a call, sell a put, sell a straddle, sell a spread, short call, short put, short straddle, short spread, and that's your game. So that can get you 50-50 right there. We need to know break even, and we need to know bullish or bearish. And if you do all those things, you got my guarantee that whatever they want to know, you got the answer. All right, so here we go. I'm going to leg into a spread. I'm going to leg into a spread. Before I do, though, let's just do this over here. So we should know that bullish would be long call. Let me put that smaller. And boom. And short put. And we should know bearish would be long put. These are just basic option positions. You know, so, you know, all spreads are derivative from these basic positions. Right? So, you know, the long call might be expensive, so I might want to sell the higher strike call to lower my out-of-pocket cost. Boom. I might want to make sure somebody sticks it to me. I can stick it to the next guy. You know, if a long put might be expensive. This is what I'm going to show you in just a sec. I'm going to sell a lower strike put to help me pay for the higher strike puts. So I'm about to show you a debit put spread. And I'm going to leg into the spread. I'm going to leg into the spread. Short call, that's really, really stupid. I mean, that's like picking up nickels in front of bulldozers. That's not so smart. So I highly recommend a credit call spread. You know, if I'm an ROP and I'm looking at the ticket, I might call you and say, what the heck are you doing selling your naked calls, Zach? Why aren't you a credit call spread? He goes, well, I'm not approved for options. I said, I'm approving you for options. All right. So let's say the dean is considering going long, buying 10 Apple December 220 puts at 13. Boom. Let's make this bigger. Whoop. And, you know, if I just did that, right? Boom. Put that down. If I just did that, my break even would be 207. My maximum gain would be 207 to 0. My max loss would be 13 points on 10 contracts. That's $13,000. Woo. Don't tell anybody, but Dean doesn't have $13,000. So it looks like I'm not going to be able to play, right? Because I'm not going to, my broker's not going to lend me money to buy options. And, you know, when you buy an option, it's incredibly difficult to be right because you got to be right about three things. You got to be right about direction. Here I'm choosing down. You got to be right about how far down. I got to be right 13 points down. I'm buying downward volatility. And I got to be right about the timing. And it's hard to be right about all those things. Very difficult to be right about all those things. So I'm going to sell. I'm implementing a spread here. I'll lower my out-of-pocket cost. Sell 10 Apple December 200 puts. What? At 7. By the way, conversation's not testable. What is testable is test question number 1. Can you identify this as a spread? A spread is when you're long and short the same type of contract. Spread means difference, right? What's the spread on the game tonight? You know, say, Dean, the spread for Team USA and South Sudan is 20 points. That's the spread. And then I can make a bet that our South Sudanese friends are going to stay within 10. They'll be in the spread. Or I can make a bet that my South Sudanese friends will be outside the spread. I used to do business not in Sudan. I did business with some countries in Africa. And it'd always be funny because when they would visit me, it would always be so funny because people would say, oh, there's your African-American friends. I go, they're not my African-American friends. They're Africans. They're from Africa. So it was funny. They used to come visit me in San Francisco. And I always said, well, wouldn't you prefer to go to like Portugal or, you know, their former, you know, colonial? When they go, no, they said, you know, they treat us like, you know, we're still second-class citizens in Portugal, even though, you know, Angola is much richer than Portugal because of the oil. And anyways, they say in San Francisco, Dean, nobody ever treats us like we're anything kind of different. I go, well, yeah, in San Francisco, to move the meter to be different in San Francisco, you really have to be different, you know, because we have all types. Anyways, so that's the spread. Spread always means difference, right? The spread in our muni underwriting was a point. So whenever you hear spread, that means you're talking about some kind of a difference. All right. So even if we couldn't identify it, we should be able to, you know, that's a test question. But if you can't identify it, you don't know what to do. You're just going to be staring at your screen going, I don't know. So we've identified it as a spread. The next thing we got to do is determine debit or credit. How are we going to do that? How do we
We're
determine?
gonna use the premiums You can use the
We're
premiums
gonna
or
net
that
the
rule you taught
premiums,
us.
right on. We're gonna net the premiums. You know, you can use debit, you can use minus sign, you can use whatever you want. Like to use dollars out, dollars in. So we're out 13 and we're in for 7. Kind of cool, by the way. I lowered my out-of-pocket cost, which is the whole point of a debit spread, not testable, but the whole point here is to lower my out-of-pocket cost because Dean does have $6,000. I don't have 13. Remember, 13 is the 10 contracts. And I told you when I started, I don't have $13,000. So that will be another reason I might want to do this debit spread is to lower my out-of-pocket cost because now the spread cost me instead of 13 grand, Dean only has to come up with 6. And that is my spread, 6 points. On 10 contracts, that's $6,000. But as I mentioned, I would do that separately. That is what we call our net debit. Right? And as I said, we can rock and roll once we get that. Right? Because we should know that when we spend money, that's going to be our loss. Right? Whenever you buy. By the way, I'm still a loser. But if Apple's 220 or higher, these contracts are going to expire and I'm going to lose 6 points or $6,000. But losing 6 is better than losing what? 13, right? Exercise, these always go together, right? When you're Dean is wide. I need to exercise. I joke in some cultures, being wide is a sign of wealth and prosperity, but not ours, right? So debit, exercise, wide always goes together. Like Mountain Dew. I just had a student, at least recently, who sent me a picture of a Mountain Dew truck and it said, just do it. And he said, hey, Dean, look at this spread on the back of this Mountain Dew truck. Do the do, or like Nike, just do it. Now, after you get the menu done, then, Zach, you can think about it. And say, okay, well, if these contracts get exercised, I called Zach. I say, Zach, you know the spread we did? He said, yeah. I said, we got exercised. He said, well, Dean, what's that mean? I said, well, remember, you're obliged to buy the stock at 200. So somebody stuck 1,000 shares of Apple to you at 200. He goes, oh my God. I go, hold on. You then, Zach, stuck it to the next guy at 220. He goes, wow, I made $20,000. I go, no, you paid 6 to get going. You didn't make 20, my friend. You made 14. The gain and the loss always equals the difference in the strikes. There's 20 points to be made or lost. Now, if you don't get that part, Zach, life is miserable. Because then you got to remember that the maximum gain in a debit spread is the difference in the strikes less the net debit. I think it's just easier to say there's 20 points to be made or lost. We spend 6 so we can make what? 14. I just think that's easier. But however you get there, you need to get there. All right, so we're working our way through. I think the hardest part to get is this idea about widen or narrow. And you don't necessarily need to get it because they go together all the time. But what we're referring to is the difference in the premiums, right? Wide and narrow, that's what that means, smaller or larger. So if the Zach does this debit spread for 6 points and he calls me, he says, Dean, what is the spread now? I say, now the spread is 9. I said, would you like me to close it out, Zach, for 9 and you make 3? You were correct. It widened from 6 to 9. Let it ride. Right? That's what we mean by widen. He says, Dean, what's the spread now? Because, Apple goes up and down and the derivatives, the options follow that, go up and down. I say right now the difference is 4. Do you want to call it a day and with a 2-point loss? Because we're not out of pocket 6 and we close it for 4, you're going to lose $200. That's the hardest part to get. Don't need to get it because wide and narrow goes together all the time. Now, the other trick is we said the gain and the loss always equals the difference in the strikes, right? So we know that whatever these two numbers are, they have to add up to the difference in the strike. So that gives you a 50-50 on the test. You can toss out anything as gain and losses that don't add up to the difference in the strikes. It can't be 15 and 6. Right? The gain and loss always equals the difference in the strikes. Another test taking trick is that the break even is somewhere between these two numbers. Right? So you can toss out any break even offered to you that isn't somewhere between 200 and 220. This is pretty cool, Zach. Without the spread, my break even would have been 220 minus 13. I would need 13 points of volatility, downward volatility, to cover my out-of-pocket cost. But now I don't need 13 points of downward volatility to cover my out-of-pocket cost. I only need 6. And it's a hell of a lot easier for Apple to go down 6 than it is for Apple to go down what? 13. We have a memory aid device for break even. You remember what the memory aid device is?
Push.
Yeah, that stands for put, subtract from the higher. Put, subtract from the higher. And then we have one as well for call spreads, and that would be cow. Call, add to the lower, right? So here we're going to take the higher strike and we're going to subtract. So put, subtract from the higher. And so here the higher strike, by the way, the higher strike is always the dominant leg. Higher strike puts always have greater premium. So it's going to be 220. And we're going to minus our out-of-pocket cost, which is 6. I always joke, if I really wanted to teach you options, I'd make you buy one. Once you were out of pocket, you'd figure out pretty quickly, you know, how it works. So once you get the menu done, then you can think about it. I say, Zach, if we buy Apple at 214 and we stick it to somebody at 220, we'd make 6, we spend 6, we break even. The last thing we got to be able to do is determine bullish or bearish. How do we determine bullish or bearish?
Is it bullish? Because they're dominating.
Oh, well, it's not bullish. You're right. It's the larger premium dominating, but it's bearish, right? A long put is going to be dominant, right? Because it has a greater premium. So that means we want Apple to go down, right? So a mantra, we could even do that if it was missing the premium, Zach, because we have a mantra, lower, higher, longer. Even if it's missing the premiums, lower, higher, longer. We know that higher strike puts always have greater premiums. Higher strike puts always have greater premiums. So even if these, we didn't know that, we know the 220 is dominant. Lower strike calls always have greater premiums. Higher strike puts always have greater premiums. Longer term option contracts always have greater premiums. All right, so there's a spread. And I think that was also on, there we go. So the last thing we got to go over in today's office hour is 75, 5, and 10. And so the number one reason, well, I shouldn't say number one reason, one of the top reasons, let's say, you know, why you buy a mutual fund. I say, do you have the time, temperament, or expertise to be managing money? And a lot of people are going to say no. I said, well, then you ought to consider a mutual fund. You know, you should hire yourself a professional money manager. So that's the number one reason to buy a mutual fund. The second reason to buy a mutual fund is diversification. You know, the easiest way, this is very testable. The easiest way to avoid selection risk, non-systematic risk, very testable, is diversification. You know, Bernard Baruch, legendary Wall Street speculator, said money is like manure and you ought to spread it around. And the easiest way for people to diversify is in a mutual fund. And so, Crystal, most people have the expectation as a retail investors, because that's who buys mutual funds, that the mutual fund is diversified. And if a mutual fund wants to hold itself out as being a diversified mutual fund, truth in labeling, it's got to have 75% of its assets invested in such a fashion that no more than 5% and it's any one target company. And they can't be a principal stockholder. They can't own more than 10% or more of the target company. So if I imagine a $100 million portfolio, I'd have to have 75 million invested in such a fashion that no more than 5 million was in any one company. And it makes sense I can't be a principal stockholder because remember, I have to meet redemption requests within 7 calendar days of receiving the request. And if I own more than 10%, I'd be subject to volume limitations under 144, right? I wouldn't be able to liquidate. I could only sell up to 1% of the outstanding shares or the average of the last 4 weeks. So we don't allow mutual funds to be principal stockholders in the companies, target companies. Target company just means the company they're buying, right? Fidelity has enough resources to buy. Some of their funds are big enough to buy entire companies, lock, stock, and barrel. No can do. In fact, we lose portfolio managers, Crystal, who don't like the restrictions of the Investment Company Act. Fidelity had a legendary mutual fund manager who was managing the Magellan Fund. His name was Jeffrey Vinnick, and he got tired of the rules we're discussing. And one day he quit. He said, I'm setting up a hedge fund. And then I have no rules. I can buy whatever I want. I can sell short. I can do options. I can do commodities. And he said, listen, it's not going to be 1%. It's going to be 2 and 20. I want 2% of the assets under management, 20% of the profits I make. Yeah. I also want to have a $50 million initial investment with a 5-year lockup. Wow. He opened up the doors. He's got like 500 million. All the people said, oh, Jeffrey, we wonder how long it was going to take you to get out of the retail side of the business. There's no money in that retail side. I'm joking, but there's lots of restrictions there when you're managing money for Joe Sixpack and when you're managing money for, institutional investors. All right. So I think that's it. Anything else in today's office hour? Okay. If not, thanks for joining us. I just put up another one. So what I do is when I do one, I put up another. Now, by the way, let's be very clear. I'm not to the folks who are joining us today. I know you guys are very clear. But if you're watching this as a replay, this is not a free tutoring hour. Every once in a while I'll say, oh, I get somebody who says, I missed the office hour, Dean. I'd like mine to be on Sunday at, 7 a.m. I go, whoa, whoa, whoa. No, this is just something that's on the schedule. If you want to participate, fine. If not, then, you do like Zach and you say, or Ethan or Crystal and say, Dean, I want to see you at 7 a.m. and here's $225. And I say, aye, I'll see you there. Right. So that's a different deal than, free office hour. All right. Any last minute things? I think that you had a pretty big topic there, Ethan. I think I did okay. If we had more than an hour, maybe next time. When's your test date? Is it coming anytime soon?
It's Monday. I'm gonna watch the
Monday.
video.
Okay. So I was going to say, I would like to go over cover calls and protected puts, but you have video replay on that. But you nailed it. So I'm feeling pretty good because your text sounds like you got the idea that partial hedges are about income, full hedges are about protection, right? So partial hedge, you're always selling the option. Full hedge, you're buying the option. And
Right.
Zach, we got your spread done. I think the most important thing we did this hour that I was pleased with, Zach, is that spread discussion we had. That is very testable, components of the spread and participants. All right, you guys got nothing else for me? Remember, inch by inch, your exam is a cinch, and yard by yard, your exam is hard. I know I'll see you, Crystal. I see Crystal. I know I'm going to see her again in an office hour somewhere. Zach, when's your test date?
Steve, August 15th.
Okay, I may see you between now and then. There's another office hour. There's a live stream. The live streams are free too. That would be Tuesday night. Either won't do you any good for your Monday. But are you taking your 66 next or your 63?
66.
So same deal. Today we just, I think, Crystal, you're taking a 7 or what are you taking?
Okay, here we are. Yeah, it's the 7 I'm taking.
Okay, we got lucky.
Christina. My
Yeah,
name is
Christina,
Christina.
what'd I say? I'm
Usually I take
sorry.
the thing off. It's
Christina, I
okay. Usually my
apologize.
name is there. It's a
I
cheat sheet.
apologize. I got so many people.
Fine.
My apologies. I know. I'll see you again. What I was going to say though is we just happened to get lucky today that everybody's taking the 7, and that really makes it nice. But Ethan, after you pass your 7, if you join us, same deal. You would be a 66, and it just goes into the chat. And I tell people go get a soda pop or whatever. We're discussing something that isn't germane to your particular exam. So, but today we were pretty lucky. We got everybody taking 7. So, all right, everybody. I'll see you later. Bye bye.
See you later. Thank you.
See you on the next one. Bye bye.